What is going on, everyone, and welcome to the Bot Podcast, where we interview movers, shakers, and innovators and talk all things conversational user interfaces. I'm your host, Chad Oda, and today we have a very special guest, Milkana Brace. Milkana is the CEO of Jargon. Jargon enables voice applications on services such as Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant to structure, organize, and optimize your content. So previously, Milkana has held leadership positions at companies such as American Express, Groupon, and Expedia. She also has been an advisor, mentor, investor, and founder of various startups over the years. And also recently, from what I hear, you've been nominated as like a startup CEO, one of the top ones by GeekWire in Seattle.
Yes.
So at that, Milkana, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Chad. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So before we roll into the more like chatbot and voice specific questions, I always like to ask all of our guests a unique question based on their background. And for you, I sort of saw like for a long time you were in the corporate space at Groupon and Expedia, at American Express, and then there was like a couple years, I think in 2015, where you just like, it seems like you just jumped into the startup space. Mm-hmm. So what was that like jump and shift in motivation for you? And also like, what's like one takeaway that you've learned over that period, which you like still apply today?
Oh my goodness. It was very much of a jump. Mm-hmm. It was very much of a, this was a chapter I've had for most of my life, which was the corporate chapter. Yeah. And then I'm putting an end to it, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but the next chapter is going to be a startup chapter.
Right.
And it was not a graceful, gradual transition. It was very much a jump. And there is a bit of a story there in that I decided, like, whenever you switch chapters in your life, like it's really important to take some time to reflect on why you're doing it and what are you going to get out of that next chapter, and also what do you need to unlearn from the previous chapter, because we kind of carry our reflexes and our networks and our learnings and apply them even subconsciously to everything we do, right? And everything had accumulated during my corporate days, I mean, some of it was relevant, but a lot of it was not so relevant. In fact, some of it was almost harmful, right? Yeah. When you're in the corporate world, you're obviously building products that already have a proven market need. And so you're really building for scale, you're building for predictability, you're building for managing risk. Like those are the types of things that are really required. Yeah. And of course, when you're in the startup world, especially at the very early stages, it's all about finding a product market fit, finding that opportunity that no one has defined for you, right? It's not about building a product, it's about finding an opportunity. And so if you apply the same reflexes to the startup world, obviously that's not a very good recipe for success. So there were a lot of things I had to unlearn, a lot of things I had to process kind of at a personal level for why I'm going into this next chapter. So we can get into a lot of detail on this, but there are probably other topics you want to cover as well. But what I did do was I took a month off, and my husband and I have a small cabin in the San Juans on a small little island. There's nothing on the island. There was no store, nothing, no transportation. And I went there on my own with my two dogs. During the month of January. So January in the San Juans in Washington State is a very rainy and dark period. The days are short, there was no one on the island, and so I didn't have internet, I didn't even have cell phone reception, no TV, and all I did during that 30-day period was I walked, I kind of hiked around, and I read one book every day, and I reflected. And the books that I had kind of compiled for my reading list were all books related to startups, related to making big decisions in one's life. And really part of that exercise for me was to think about what is my motivation, what is my why behind why I'm doing this jump, and what is going to sustain me as things get tough or as I have distractions and whatnot. And so it was actually an incredibly helpful period just to kind of move away from all of the noise that's around us. So I could hear my own voice louder than any of the other noises around me and any of the other voices. And I would say that was just a really transformational experience for me, and one I'm really glad I did.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I love your enthusiasm for all of this. Like, I can totally tell you're very passionate about like sort of jumping into the startup space. And, you know, I do really agree with you. I think like self-reflection before making huge decisions is like just so imperative because it enables you to sort of craft your own identity and stand like on your 2 feet and just like go into the unknown, which is really the voice space right now. So,
That's right.
you know, I think that's just so awesome. And thank you for sharing that. So, you know, sort of going along that path, how did you sort of end up in the voice space? You know, especially because you guys got into the Amazon Alexa Startup Accelerator, so that's really exciting. And, you know, voice, you know, really in sort of the way that consumers see it has only really been around for the past couple of years by way of Amazon Alexa's platform. So how did you sort of get into that space?
Yeah, I wish it were. I wish I could say it was a very linear and thoughtful and easy path. Of course, it wasn't. I ended up taking all sorts of side turns and side steps and explored many different things. And in all honesty, there was a ton of serendipity that was really required for us to be, you know, where we are today, which is, you know, Jargon is a company in the voice space. We have had some traction already. We have, I think, a really strong founding team, a really strong initial team. We're adding more people. And so we're still in very early stages, but at least we have a clear path for where we're going next. At least for now, right?
Yeah.
Until we learn something else. So yeah, it was definitely not a linear journey coming here. I would say I kind of dabbled in several different ideas. I worked on different projects, and then eventually in December of, and then eventually I wanted to start Jargon with a totally different idea. And it's not even worth getting into the details, but I'll just say it was a mobile app in the hospitality space, so completely unrelated to voice. And one of the first things I knew I had to do was team up with an amazing co-founder. And so I went through a long process of looking for a co-founder, and in fact ended up pairing up with 2 people. And one of them was Jonathan Burstein, who is the CTO of Jargon. And so we founded the company in December of 2017. And shortly thereafter, the other co-founder left. So Jonathan and I have really been on this journey together. And with the previous idea, we ended up getting into the Alexa Accelerator in July of 2018. And while we were going through the accelerator, we decided that, you know, mobile is so 10 years ago. What are we doing building a mobile product? Voice is really the future, and what an amazing opportunity to be part of the voice ecosystem, being part of the Alexa Accelerator, and frankly also being in Seattle, having contacts to the Alexa organization. For example, Jonathan was previously a principal engineer at Amazon for many years. We also have Microsoft here, and we figured what a wonderful opportunity to really ride the wave of the next platform, which is voice.
Very cool. Yeah, because I think our last conversation, I was actually meeting you guys, like as you guys were maybe exiting the accelerator, and I remembered when you said you guys were pivoting, and then it was getting into the Alexa space, and then ever since then, it's just been this very fast, straight shot. As far as I can tell, it seems like everything has sort of been a success up until this point, and you guys are moving really fast. So that
I'm glad it appears like that on the outside.
Yes, of course.
That's not what it feels like on a day-to-day basis, but we all know that's how things work, right?
But that's the exciting part, right? It's like it's like a roller coaster of emotions. You know, some days are good, some days are not so good. But you know, in the end, you know, as long as we have that sort of vision as to why we're trying to achieve something, you know, I think something really special can sort of manifest. That being said, so the place you guys are at today with Jargon, right? What was that like customer need that you guys really thought was, you know, something to build a product around to try and solve? So maybe if you could explain sort of that metamorphosis of how you guys identified that need, and then also how Jargon sort of addresses that.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's talk about what the need is that we see, and then I'll kind of talk about how we stumble upon it. So really the kind of broader pattern that we see happening with voice is that, of course, voice adoption has been incredible. You know, like voice has been adopted at a faster rate than any other technology previously, faster than mobile, faster than TVs, faster than radio, etc., faster than the internet. And while adoption of voice has been phenomenal, the usage and retention leaves a lot to be desired, right? A lot of people use voice for pretty basic scenarios. And we think that the future of voice, the potential of voice, is that we naturally interact with technology in a very unstructured way. And for that to happen, you need to have context. You need to have the dialogue between what the user says and what the application, the voice application says, be very contextual and very dynamic. And today that is not really possible because of the tools that do not exist in place. And so what happens as a result is a lot of the voice applications that get created have, for the most part, static content inside of them, or have some relatively small variation of content, but it's not that rich experience that you would expect if you wanted to have a truly human-like conversation on these voice platforms. So yeah, that's the opportunity we see, and we're building a set of tools, really developer tools and content management tools that will enable third-party applications to create this rich dialogue and dynamic dialogue for their users.
Cool, very cool. So maybe diving a little deeper into the need, it sounds like. So if what I understand, it sounds like today, many of the experiences on Amazon Alexa are these single turn experiences, not much variance in sort of the interaction based upon, historical context. So are you saying that, your platform sort of makes it easier to make some or add more dynamic content to sort of make those experiences sort of more curated and customized to specific people and context?
Yeah, so let me give you an example. Alexa is obviously a very advanced platform, and there are already 100,000 third-party skills or third-party apps on top of Alexa. But of course, we also have support for Google. We think what Google is doing is extremely exciting, and we are also very encouraged by other tech giants that are heavily investing in the space. So we see ourselves as a cross-platform player. But to kind of answer your question, today when you open a third-party voice application, your experience with the app, so what you hear in the app is, chances are, the exact same experience as I have, right? And that's not how mobile and web work. Like, your experience on a mobile app is different from my experience on a mobile app, and it should be, right? Based on your previous engagement with the app, based on any history you have with the brand. So really they tailor the experience for you, just like they tailor the experience for me. And so similarly in the voice context, you would expect that what you hear is informed by everything the brand knows about you, by the context in which you're asking the question. For example, are you asking it from a private space, a public space, a moving vehicle? There are all sorts of contextual factors that should influence what you hear back, which is not the case today.
So I know that sort of context mapping to dynamic content exists today, but if what I understand is there's sort of a bottleneck in the efficiency in which developers today can sort of bring that together. So does your platform sort of make that more accessible and make it easier to organize and sort of structure that data? Yeah,
so the idea is for us to provide a set of functionality that makes it far easier for developers to deliver that dynamic content, so they don't have to recreate that internally within the app, but they can just leverage our products. Mm-hmm. And it also makes it easier for non-developers to create that content and manage that content without engaging the engineering team and without making the engineering team a bottleneck.
And I think that is a huge differential for what you guys are doing, because I feel like, in any technology sort of hype cycle or sort of revolution, right, we see this tech centricity almost, sometimes to a fault, until things start to mature and we start to align it against, the stakeholders that are going to be experiencing those new technologies, whether that be developers or whether that be end consumers. And I think the interesting thing about your platform is the fact that we're finally seeing this division of labor. As far as the people that are creating these skills, as far as, we need developers, we need conversational designers. And I feel like for a while, it was so tech-centric. Mm-hmm. There was this efficiency that just wasn't there, right? So for example, if we're designing a skill and, we want to go tweak, one conversation flow, right? Previously, we had to go into the code base and, we couldn't get our, VUX designer to go ahead and change that. We had to go it took more time, right? So this begins to help create that division of labor, not only from a resource standpoint, but it enables that through your application, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That is absolutely the opportunity we see. And I think you make a really good observation, which is we're definitely seeing a shift in the industry. In the early days, and we are still in the early days, but even earlier days than now, skills were really highly experimental, right? And especially when you think about large brands creating skills, they were really more from kind of the innovation lab or some innovation budget, and it was usually a couple of people who were tinkering around, who were maybe repurposing a chatbot application or something like that as a starting point. But now, in a pretty short time, the industry is starting to mature, and we're seeing more and more focus being placed on voice, and which means more and more players. So maybe you have a marketing team involved, you have an engineering team involved, you have the UX designers, you have maybe a legal team that has to review the content, you have maybe an external agency that is creating the core of the app. And so enabling that collaboration to happen across multiple stakeholders is also one of the problems that we're helping solve.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because it's almost like we have it's almost like the most efficient workflow to develop these things is still evolving. But in that space, right, we're getting platforms such as yours that are beginning to really augment what that flow looks like between a variety of different stakeholders. So I can totally see that sort of value add, to make it more accessible to multiple people on that team. So from a developer standpoint, why is this useful for them, right? Why would a developer want to use it? How would they sort of integrate it into what they're already doing today?
Yeah, and when you say this, there are really kind of multiple tools that we have built, or we're building, or we're planning to build, and over time they will be part of a kind of a cohesive platform, if you will. But there are multiple tools that appeal to, let's say, developers versus non-developers. And probably the most obvious thing is we have an SDK, and we've talked previously, Chad, about that. But the Jargon SDK is available on the Alexa and on Google Assistant, and also the Jovo framework, which is quite popular with developers as well. And the SDK helps developers organize their content inside the skill. So even if they never plan to use any of the additional tools and services that we are building, using the SDK kind of as a library inside their skill will help them organize the content in a more efficient way. So it makes it easier for the developers themselves to change the content over time. And certainly as we add additional tools that make that process easier, or that offload some of that process away from developers and onto non-developers, I think a lot of developers would embrace the concept of not having to make tedious changes related to content, but having that be done by someone else, for example.
Totally, that makes a whole lot of sense, especially since we are beginning to get to that point where large brands are adopting this, and they're not just using it for they're not just using their R&D budget, as you say. They're earmarking significant amounts of funds to really drive really compelling experiences for their customers. So that being said, are you able to share maybe any customer use cases today that might be interesting to the users? I mean, to our viewers here?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we have partnered up with a small number of voice agencies as we design the new wave of tools that we're building, and they're really our design partners. But we are always looking for early adopters, whether it's brands or voice agencies or independent developers, or even kind of players in the IoT space that are using voice. So to the degree any of your listeners are interested in being an early adopter and providing feedback, we would very much welcome that. As I mentioned earlier, our CTO, Jonathan Burstein, was at Amazon for a long time, and you probably know Amazon very much has that philosophy of starting with the customer and working backwards. We're very much taking that approach as well. So Sean Withers on our team, you've met with him. He recently spoke to over 50 agencies to really understand kind of the needs of how agencies put together projects and what the gaps are. And in addition to that, we talk to customers literally every day. But if there are specific listeners who are interested in joining our program and being early design partners, we would obviously love to hear from you. So our website is jargon.com. You can contact us there, or you can track any of us down on LinkedIn and contact us there as well.
Cool, very cool. So maybe talking about like maybe specific use cases, if you can share any of those where you guys have implemented Jargon. It could be like, from the smallest, brand to the largest brand, just out of curiosity, like what's the feedback you're hearing from brands, and also what's the feedback you're hearing from like these development agencies?
Yeah, I would say that it's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
And the feedback is that there are different problems that kind of appear at the different phases of development, if you will. So there's some pain points related to content that are pretty obvious as one envisions and designs and develops the application, and they're fairly different from what it takes to run the application on an ongoing basis and kind of modify it and change it and maintain it. And so we think that there are kind of different pain points in that content lifecycle, development lifecycle, project lifecycle, and really content lifecycle. So for example, we already talked about increasingly the multiple stakeholders involved in crafting the content in the early stages of the project. And if you think about post-launch, there's also a very clear need that's emerging, which is, hey, how is this app doing for us? What are really the engagement metrics that we should be tracking and that we need to care about and that we need to be acting on? And I think that there's still a lot of like learning that's happening in the industry right now. Like a lot of the projects we are seeing are more focused on kind of getting through that initial phase and launch. And then there's almost a little bit of like, oh, and now what, So we definitely expect to see some learnings and maturity in the in like a pretty short amount of time, I would hope, and I would expect, in terms of like how people really think about what's the value of their app and where do they take it from there, How do they drive engagement? How do they drive ROI? How do they ultimately monetize that skill or that action or that app in general?
Yeah, no, you make like a really great point, because like it seems to me like the thing that's underlying this entire ecosystem right now is content, right? It's almost like, to a certain extent, we don't necessarily know the best type or format of content. That's why some of the largest companies like BDC are continuously testing different types of content and different lengths and different mediums on these platforms. So I do very much believe that platforms such as yours will really help to make that turnaround as far as iterating on content either quicker, or to your point, it sounds like you may be going down a route of helping extracting insights, if I'm reading between the lines a little bit here. So I think as far as I can tell right now, it's like, how do we find the tools to make it easier to get content out there, and then from that perspective, then how do we know what content users are going to engage with? Because it's like almost like we need to get to the engagement of content first before we can even have a real practical conversation around monetization. So I'm just curious, like, to hear your thoughts around, what you've seen in the space as far as like engagement with content formats, and then also maybe just like, touching on monetization and your viewpoints, just where we're at today, and it's still early times. So prefacing that.
My goodness, like lots of very big questions.
Yeah.
So let's kind of break it down a little bit. In terms of the apps that are doing well, I mean, certainly streaming audio content, whether it's kind of radio programming or music, like podcasts, those kinds of experiences have really done phenomenally well on the voice services like Alexa and Google Assistant and whatnot. And so clearly, so far, that has been a very, very great scenario. In fact, I was reading a report, you've probably seen this, that public radio is now consumed more because of smart speakers than it was previously. So isn't that wonderful? So that's clearly a use case that has done well, and I think the industry overall is still trying to find out, okay, well, how do we make commerce possible and painless, and such that you choose to transact through voice because that's more intuitive, not because it's less intuitive, right? And right now it's a pretty painful process. So that set of transactions still needs to, that set of experiences still needs to get worked out. And there are, a number of friction points in there, but I'm personally fully confident that voice commerce is going to be massive. Another set of use cases you might have are around information gathering, right? So maybe you're interacting with a brand and you have a support question. You're using their product, it broke down, and you have a support question, and you want to be able to kind of troubleshoot with the brand in real time, very contextually. Wouldn't that be a wonderful experience to have, right? Like the brand will cut back on their support costs, provide a great contextual experience. It's also an opportunity for them to potentially upsell right on the spot. Like, hey, can we send you a replacement for this or whatever? Do you need a new model of that? So we think kind of information gathering support scenarios are going to be pretty massive. And I 100% believe that there will be some kind of killer apps that end up emerging that are voice first, right? Just like Instagram was not possible before mobile, there is going to be an Instagram for voice, right?
That moment,
not
right?
exactly Instagram for voice, but kind of that voice first, voice only experience. As an experience, as a product, as even a business model, that is only enabled because of the proliferation of voice. And clearly that hasn't emerged yet. But I'm confident that it will emerge, and maybe someone is working on it right now. Maybe your next guest on this podcast is working on this kind of an application soon. So anyway, I think we're, to your point, like very much in the infancy of voice. And while the first scenarios that are emerging are scenarios that exist from elsewhere that we're just repurposing to voice. So whether it's chatbots or mobile or web experiences that we're repurposing to voice, I think that there are going to be new scenarios that emerge that we cannot even imagine yet based on our current world. And then I think your second question was around monetization, right?
I think you definitely touched on it a little bit as well, right? With the conversational commerce piece of things.
Yes, conversational commerce. There are clearly opportunities to monetize inside the skill, right? As an independent developer, you can create, games or engaging experiences and really start to monetize that within the skill. Amazon is certainly pushing very kind of. They're really creating a very supportive environment for developers to create those experiences, because ultimately we all want to do something that has value, right? And of course, a great way to demonstrate value and capture value is through monetary transactions. So there are definitely skills that can be created that enable monetization from within. Another way to capture monetization is if there is a transaction that happens through kind of voice commerce. But also I think it's important to, especially for brands, to think more broadly about how voice fits into their multi-channel strategy, in that voice is really a way to engage their customers in new ways. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the customer will transact through voice. If they become more engaged, more committed, more loyal to the brand, that can have huge impact to the brand, even if it's not measured right during that session. For the customer. But I do think that monetization, like really figuring out all of the ways in which brands and independent developers can make money off of voice, is going to be a huge accelerator to just the proliferation of engaging skills, engaging voice applications.
Yeah, definitely. So from the first thing you talked about was sort of engagement, how we're still sort of in this sort of early period right now where we're still trying to figure out not only what tools are going to best help enable these experiences, but also like what formats and what use cases, right? Whether it be customer support or conversational commerce, or just being able to take pre-existing experiences like the radio, which are really, really interesting actually, that more people are consuming it now, because for a while it seemed as though that public radio was sort of dying off, and that was sort of like one of the technologies that seemed to be a bit older, but with voice user interfaces sort of bringing new life to that. I think that's really compelling. And then from like conversational commerce sides of things, I do definitely agree with you. I think it's like building blocks right now. Let's figure out what's engaging. Let's figure out, from the customer journey, right? Where does voice sort of, as a touch point, where does it make sense, right? Maybe it's good for transactional for this specific brand's, customer journey. Maybe it's just to engage them early on, as you say, and you make it more engaging and create a really compelling experience. So then maybe they go to the website and purchase something, or they, walk into the dealership and buy the car. So
Exactly.
absolutely, like I definitely think, it's almost as though that we're now beginning to sort of see what are those successive steps, so I think the vision is becoming more clear just as an ecosystem as a whole. But no, I really appreciate that perspective, because I think, right now we're hearing so many voices in the industry, right? From people on the brand side, the startup side, from like the large company side of things. So it's always good to just make sure we have diverse voices, talking on this topic here. So that being said, you sort of spoke to it a little bit, right? So Jargon has an SDK out right now, and you guys sort of do localization as a service. And you sort of said, a couple things about analytics. So where do you guys see yourself going, within the next year and, subsequent years after that?
Yeah, so you mentioned localization, and we didn't actually talk about
Yeah.
localization as part of this conversation, so let me provide a little bit of context. So we really think about kind of content management, and that is what we're looking to manage more efficiently on behalf of voice applications, right? Or create tools for them to manage more efficiently. And we came across the need for localization as one of the problems that exist in that space, and really the scenario there being, someone has developed a voice app in, let's say, English,
Right.
and they want to take it to, let's say, France or Japan or Mexico, whatever the case might be. That dialogue that happens inside the app needs to be translated, but it also needs to be localized, right? It needs to maintain the same conversational tone and nature that exists in the original app. And usually people spend so much time crafting what that native experience is like, and then localization comes as an afterthought, and they don't appreciate that you have to craft, you have to apply that same level of attention in how you localize it, so that really the intent and the tone of the experience is preserved. But how do you take a skill that was developed for the U.S. market and then localize it for Japan? There are no underlying tools for making that easy. So one of the set of tools we've built is the ability to extract the content from a skill, kind of parse it, and make it easy for a human translator to localize that, using also automated translation as kind of aid and supporting tools, but really having a human translator go through and touch up the content and really ensure that it has that conversational tone. And so once the content is localized, we repackage it and push it back to the developer in the exact same format. So we've automated that process, and that's one of the aspects of content management that we think has value, and we've certainly had customers there who have told us that it added tremendous value to them. And then beyond that, as I mentioned, we have a roadmap of additional tools that we're building that are related to content management. And frankly, we're experimenting, we're learning, we're working on some very specific things, but we're also open to learning from customers on what the needs are. And as those tools become available, maybe in a later chat, we can, I can certainly talk about them in more detail.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think that makes a whole lot of sense, right? I think the content management piece to me seems like, significant obstacle opportunity right now that it sounds like is being addressed, by startups like yourself, by larger companies and, other startups in the space. And then, an add-on feature, it sounds like, is the localization piece, right? Say you're a multinational company, you have something in English, you want to take it to Russia or whatever country you want. So do you guys sort of handle that sort of whole end-to-end process of like the translation and localization in-house, and then you sort of push that back out to, said company?
Yeah, so we have actually a couple of models.
Yeah.
One model is that there are some cases where the customer have in-house translators.
Yeah.
They just need the underlying tools. And so in that case, the customer can just use our tools. Or the more likely scenario, which is where the bulk of our customers have landed, is they have a skill or they have an app and they want it localized in whatever other language, and then they just want to receive the output, the localized output in the exact same format, so they can plug it in and basically launch in the new country. And we handle that whole end-to-end process on their behalf. Now, we are not a localization agency ourselves, so we partner with translators, and once again, we provide them with the tools, but we partner with translators. And also we've partnered with voices.com. So for example, if there's native audio in the app, so pre-recorded audio in the app, and let's say it's in English, and as part of the localization for Japan, it needs to be, the pre-recorded audio needs to be translated and recorded in Japanese. Through our partnership with Voices, we get that done, right? And we can look for the exact same persona, like in terms of who the actor is that does the recording, as what the brand intended or what the customer intended with their original app. So again, we handle that end-to-end process on behalf of customers, and what they get back is basically the same app with all of the assets, but localized for the new market.
Yeah, no, that sounds super handy, So, for the audience out there, if you guys are looking to take what you have here and then go to another country, definitely check out Jargon. That being said, I think a really important thing about any emerging ecosystem, right, is not only, where we're seeing successes, but also obstacles. So as you sort of, peer across, the ecosystem and, from being in the accelerator at Amazon and just talking to brands and talking to agencies alike, are there other obstacles that you firmly believe exist right now in the voice space? And I'd definitely love to hear what you have to say around that.
Yeah, there are a number of friction points in the industry, for sure, in the ecosystem overall, that will have to be sorted out. Some of them are really for the tech giants that are building these voice services to sort out, and I'll talk about some of them. And some of them are opportunities for startups, or opportunities for agencies, or opportunities for brands to really tackle. We talked about monetization. That's obviously a massive one, and figuring out how monetization really works and works at scale and works frictionlessly. Is that a word? But it works without friction. That's obviously a massive hurdle. I would say another big hurdle is discovery. So discovery of voice applications is still something that's, if you ask the average person on the street, even someone who already has a smart speaker, have they engaged with third-party apps? Chances are they wouldn't have, because they don't even know how to discover them and how to activate them. So obviously that's a huge point of friction, and I believe that it's really the platforms themselves that will have to sort that problem out. So how do you discover great applications? And then there's a second level of discovery that is also broken, and that is the discovering inside an app. So once you have triggered a particular third-party application, how do you know what you can actually ask it? How do you know how to engage with it? How do you know what are the boundaries of that application? That's also not clear, right? So that's another confusing thing. The other thing that's super confusing is, which also needs to be addressed, is kind of the dialogue inside, right? We talked about dialogue today feels very almost like robotic and very constraining, and you need to know exactly how to engage with the app and what to say next and what to ask next. And it's not this fluid, free-form conversation. Obviously, we'll need to get to a point where that is possible. So those are some of the high-level points of friction that exist in the industry. But to me, that's incredibly exciting, because all of those are opportunities, right? And all of those can be solved through technology. And in some cases, the technology is not quite proficient. In some cases, there are no elegant solutions. In some cases, conceptually, it's easy to understand how it would work, but actually practically making it possible, it's not easy. But it's all solvable. And to me, that's very exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think all those obstacles, as we say, are great opportunities for other startups or for large brands. And I also heard you mention, you said, so there was also obstacles you saw from like the large brands perspective as well. I'm curious about that, or maybe you covered them in what you guys.
Well, I mean, just some of the things that come to mind, and we touched upon this earlier, but for large brands, they should be thinking about voice as part of their multi-channel experience. So how can you engage with a customer through voice, in addition to how you engage with them in mobile and web and perhaps in person, physical retail store or whatever, in a consistent way? And how can you learn from their voice engagement to inform other channels, right? Brands are not quite there yet. And so I think going back to some of the opportunities there, like figuring out what success means, like what does successful engagement in a voice app means for a particular brand, for a particular scenario, is something that I think brands will be served well to really spend some time thinking about, because I think there's tremendous potential there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, right? It's sort of, it's almost like, broken record at this point, but it's a good thing, right? It's the fact that, it is early time still, and, that is just huge opportunity, for startups and for, agencies and enthusiasts. So, I think it's just a really encouraging thing to hear. That being said, also on the same token of looking at obstacles and challenges, like, have you guys seen like best practices, whether they're best practices you guys have identified or best practices that you've heard other people mention to you guys, just, in the voice space or just the conversational space in general?
You stumped me on this one. One thing I would say is that I have found the overall community to be incredibly open and sharing. And to the degree that there are any kind of insights that people are coming across, they're pretty open in sharing them. So from that perspective, I wouldn't come up with like a list of like, here are the 10 best practices, but I would say as new things are kind of surfacing, the community is very generous in proliferating that information. And I would also say like what my personal experience has been with other players in the space, like other startups in the space, for example, like we're pretty open to sharing what we're seeing and what some of the challenges are, and even companies that it's possible that down the road we end up in more of a competitive situation. But at this stage, like truly, I have seen nothing but people being very open and kind of generous with just sharing their learnings.
Yeah, I can totally attest to that.
Yeah, that's your experience as well, right?
Oh yeah, totally. It's just like everyone is like so excited about the new technology, and it's just like, they'll show best practices or insights, and it's just, I think, and I think you probably share the same sentiment. It's like there are really smart people working on things, but sometimes it's a bit, fragmented. So like when these communities can come together, like we can just solve problems way quicker than if one person was just working in a dark room by themselves. So
I 100% agree with you, and I would add to that if you're a true believer in voice, which I am, I also believe that this is going to be such a massive overall opportunity that a lot of people will benefit from it. So what's the point in trying to hoard information or compete at this early stage? Like we should be helping each other out, because that helps the industry evolve.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more with you. So looking ahead, right? Just looking, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years ahead, like, does it have to be specific, or can be specific, or can be broad? Like, what's your just vision of like, where does all this technology end up? Like, what's your idealized vision of, maybe when you walk into your house in 5 years, like, just your personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is not something that I've had an amazing insight on my own. I think this is shared by a lot of people who are in the space, but voice is going to be everywhere, right? And it's going to be contextual. And you can kind of seamlessly move around and interface with technology, with brands, with products through voice. So obviously, I think there's a lot of momentum towards kind of that becoming a reality in the not so distant future. And then the other trend I would say is, we personally at Jargon believe that it's about voice also, not voice only. So we think that there are going to be some voice only experiences, but really the vast majority of experiences will be multimodal, right? They will have a visual component to them that's seamlessly integrated. And so maybe there's, I don't know, maybe there's like an image or video, or there's some other assets that's really part of the overall voice experience. And so I think making that seamless, where you're kind of seamlessly moving across different media and different modes, multimodal, right, is going to be something that becomes a reality, I think, pretty quickly.
Definitely. No, I agree like 100% with that. I don't know if any one person could predict exactly how it's going to look, but what we can say is that voice is definitely like a huge opportunity, and there's a lot of passionate people involved in it. So at this point, I just want to give you the floor for a couple minutes if you want to tell the audience anything in particular about Jargon, maybe where they can find out more information, or maybe see you guys speak, or anything like that. So the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you. So once again, our website is jargon.com, so you can look us up and find a bit more information about what we do. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking for developers who are early adopters of dev tools and content management tools. So if you're interested in being part of our kind of design group and alpha customers, we would love to hear from you. In terms of, we are hiring right now. We are hiring engineers. We're looking to add 4 more engineers in Seattle to the team. So if you happen to be in this, in the area and interested, and if what we're working on is of interest to you, please look me up. We're looking to hire some really phenomenal team members and teammates. And in terms of events, we right now are in a phase of our existence where we are really heads down building the product. We think that our time is best spent on that for the upcoming months, and then once we are at a point where we have more products to show the world and share with people, we'll focus a little bit more on events. But yeah, we are always online, just like everyone else. So you can, again, find us through our website, and would love to hear any feedback you might have or questions. And again, because this is such an early industry and we are a startup in our own early existence, a lot of what we end up doing is very much a reflection of conversations we have in the industry with customers, with people like yourself, people who are really plugged in and know and see opportunities. So if we hear pain points from you, that will help us prioritize resolving those pain points or addressing those pain points in our products. So any feedback is much appreciated.
Sweet, love the update. So before we let you leave, I always ask our guests, especially since it's such an emerging space, and sometimes not everything is clear. The road isn't always like obvious to a lot of us. What keeps you motivated? What keeps you going on a day-to-day basis to just like sort of have at it and continue down that road?
All of the things you just said. I mean, that's what makes it exciting, right?
Yeah, totally.
If you had a clear roadmap for what's ahead, if you knew exactly what every day is going to look like ahead of you, how boring would that be, right? No, it's exactly what you said. I think the potential of voice is incredible. I think there's so much energy and enthusiasm. I think that the space has attracted a lot of incredibly smart and gifted and creative people. It's fun to be part of that community. It's fun to work through all these problems we've talked about. It's fun to not know what the future holds, but to still have that sense that it's a bright future nevertheless. It's all of those things for sure.
Absolutely, I love it. Well, Milkana, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. We'll definitely have you come back soon once you guys can share some of your super secret things on the roadmap down the line. So we're definitely excited for that. So Milkana, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chad.